humans. Welcome to the Human Beauty Movement podcast. I'm your host, Jennifer Norman. Throughout my life, I've been a lover and a seeker of all things beauty, from art and dance to cosmetics and fashion to music and nature. But through my own personal journey, I've come to discover what I believe is the most beautiful thing in the universe, the beauty of the human soul. On this podcast, I sit down with beautiful humans from all corners of the globe and all walks of life to learn how they are living their own unique soul beauty out loud. You'll hear from game changers, rebels with great causes, sages, odds beaters, and valiant warriors who fall down 7 times and get up 8. This is the podcast where abundant energy flows and supreme wisdom is bestowed. Get ready to enjoy the inspiration. Hello, beautiful humans. I'm Jennifer Norman, founder of the Human Beauty Movement and your host. It's my life's work to show you how radical self-love and radical self-acceptance will lead you to manifest your most fulfilling life. So now there's nothing quite like the power of storytelling, particularly on our screens. And my guest today is committed to diverse storytelling with an emphasis on increasing representation on all sides of the camera. Farah Merani is a classically trained South Asian Muslim actor and creator based between LA and Toronto, who has performed on stage and on screen across North America, throughout Europe, and in Russia. She's appeared in AppleTV's See and NBC-TV's Quantum Leap, as well as Shadowhunters and Nikita. Farah has lived in 6 different countries on 3 continents and speaks 4 languages. And she's dedicated to sharing the stories of her family, her community, and her ancestors. So welcome to Farah.
Thank you. Wow, there's nothing like hearing your life kind of repeated back to you. Wow, thank you for that.
You're welcome. Now, our listeners are going to be eager to get to know you. So why don't you tell us about your background and your work?
Sure. Well, I mean, you summarized the broad strokes. I grew up in a small town that nobody knows called North Bay, which is about 4 hours north of Toronto. And I always like to start there because I think growing up in a small town where we were one of a few, maybe a handful of people of color in town was really impactful on me at a very early age because I didn't notice it. I didn't see it necessarily. I felt it, but I didn't necessarily see it or acknowledge it because I was so young. But it was also really idyllic, and it gave me the opportunity to be a part of so many different things. Like, I was a dancer growing up, so I studying ballet, tap, jazz every day of my life. That's what I wanted to do, was be a dancer. And I skied a lot as well. So, my mom would drop me off at the ski hill and we'd spend the day skiing, and that was my upbringing. And then we moved to Ottawa, and I did my high schooling in Ottawa, which is where my family lives now. But then I went to university in Toronto, and I really feel like moving to Toronto was the moment where in my life where I integrated my desire to be an actor with the reality of what being an artist could be like. I went to university, and it was the compromise. And again, I think a really important moment to block. This was the compromise between my parents and I, that I would go to college, I would study something, I would get a degree. And as my father liked to say, for my second degree, then we can talk. First degree, I could do whatever I want, but the second one, we'd talk. So I studied drama and Middle Eastern studies. Those were my 2 areas of interest. And it was great. I got to learn so much and be a part of so many things. And when I graduated, by the time I graduated, I had a talk with my dad. I knew in my heart, and this was like really the first time that I had the courage to declare, not just say it, but to really declare that this is what I wanted to do in my life. And mind you, I come from a family of medical professionals. So the idea of me pursuing a career in the arts was, oh, it's cute, it's a nice hobby, but like, what are you really going to do with your life? You know what I mean? Yeah. So I had a moment, and I was being groomed to be a lawyer, to be like, the head of some business or something. I was always very academically inclined. I knew that there was something compelling me towards storytelling, and I was always a natural storyteller as well, which ironically I learned from my father. So I remember sitting down with him one day, and I was like, okay, Dad, I know you want me to be a lawyer, but the only way you're ever going to see me as a lawyer is the day you see me on Law and Order.
He might not be a lawyer, but I play one on TV.
I can play one, right? So I think that was the moment where it stopped him. I remember his reaction, like he didn't know what to say. And he was like, okay, if that's what you want. I was like, yeah, it
Mm.
is. Okay, then. And not to say that it was wholeheartedly embraced right out of the gate, but it really did become a moment of like a touchstone that I've consistently come back to. And I've played a lot of lawyers in my day now too. So like, my cousin who is a lawyer says I can speak really good legalese and can navigate a contract really well. Like that truly was the moment where I think I was allowed to embrace my identity as an artist, because from there, I give entire credit to my father. He said to me, because I was in Toronto, graduated, and he was like, if this isn't the place for you to do what you need to do, you need to go and find it. And in my heart and head, I thought, I want to be on stage and I love Shakespeare, so let me go to England. And my brother was already there. So I moved to England and I went to drama school there. I had this amazing experience living in London. And it's really where I became the artist that I am. And it was from living in London that I had the opportunity to live in Moscow. Story for another day.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's a whole other thing that I experienced. I went to India and I lived there for a bit. I dated somebody in Paris. So I was back and forth between London and Paris. And then I decided I'm going to set up shop there for a little bit, realized that was not the place for me, and moved back to London and then eventually moved back to Toronto. And as soon as I got back to Toronto, I decided this is not the place for me either. So I set my sights on Los Angeles and I got my green card in order. And 2 years later, this is also pre-Trump, pre-COVID, landed in LA, and I've been here ever since. That's 5 years now. So that's in a nutshell.
Amazing. So
Yeah.
now, all the while where you were growing up in, Toronto, Ottawa, the places in Canada, and even going to England, did you find representation in the community? Like, were there others that were like you? Can you tell me about that?
There were few, maybe few and far between, but there were a few. And I know initially, we all kind of found each other, or we would clock each other.
It's like, I see you.
I see you. Okay, so I'm not the only one. Okay, so there's a few of us here. But it wasn't the kind of embracing community that I experience now. Like now it is a completely different tone. But when I was starting out, I remember my mom said this to me. It was something that she had received from one of her friends when they found out that I was pursuing a career in the arts. And they're like, oh, it's so good of you to support your daughter in the arts. It's so important that we have artists. And then, they have a conversation. Oh, but my kids are not. Like, I would never let my kids pursue a career in the arts. Like, it's brave of you to let your daughter do it. So there was this feeling of like, I can imagine for my parents wrestling with, oh gosh, what is my daughter doing? Like, why would she do this to herself? She's got so much potential. But then on the flip side, being praised for supporting a dream that a lot of people are too afraid to pursue. And so as a result, on my end, there was this kind of, I don't want to say it was a conflict, but there was not a resistance either, but there was an odd disconnect between like, yes, I feel supported, but then also I don't have people around me who are doing what I'm doing so that I can see how to do it. And the people I do see were often pitted against each other as opposed to feeling like we're in this, doing this together. So it was a very different sentiment where I really did internalize this idea that I'm out here like a frontiers person, marking my own trail, doing this on my own, chopping down all the path before me, because I really didn't see anybody doing it. And those I did see, I would emulate or I would try to follow in step, but I was always hit or confronted by a reality that was very different from theirs. And I started realizing that it had everything to do with my appearance, not as a woman, but as a woman of color. For the longest time, in fact, like I had chopped my hair off, I had really short hair, I had piercings, like I completely went in the other degree where I didn't want to associate with being Indian because I'm Canadian first. Let me be Canadian, let me be a woman first. And then I moved to England and it didn't matter that I was Canadian. It didn't matter how I sounded. What mattered most was how I looked, and I was confronted with the reality that when I enter into the world, people see me, receive me, the melanin in my skin, not by my gender expression. And that was my reality. So it was really in moving to England that I had to confront a huge piece of my identity and really start embracing in a completely different way. And I'm very grateful for having been in England during that time because the Indian population, the South Asian population, they call us Asians. So the South Asian / Asian population in England is much more robust than it is in Canada and the United States. And there's a greater embracing of Indian culture and identity in the fabric of society and specifically on screen. So that honestly, that's where I really started seeing as authentic it could be at that time for me, representation on screen and on stage, because theater is a big part of the British culture. I really started seeing the kind of work I wanted to be a part of could look like. And then it really inspired in me this commitment. And it, like, I tiptoed around it. I started volunteering with, they call them, I don't know if they still call us this, BMEs, British Minority Ethnics. So it's very cute. The union had a committee for people of color, BMEs, and I started volunteering. And it was through that I started also observing how the industry was wrestling, at least from the British side, with this idea of diversity without calling it diversity. And then I moved back to Canada and I got knee deep in with diversity and inclusion practices, policies, and issues through the Canadian Union and through ACTRA, and was afforded the opportunity to be a co-chair of the diversity committee. And that truly was when artistry, activism just like zipped up together. And it became so clear to me that my work as a storyteller, my work as artist, just as a human being doing what I do, that it comes with a responsibility to embody the principles and the values that I stand by, and honoring my identity and my heritage is a huge part of that. And I recognize that when I stand in front of a camera or I stand on stage, the audience, whoever the witnesses of whatever I'm doing, the audience are receiving everything that I come with, whether they're aware of it or not. And that to me is really impactful, really exciting, and just makes me want to do it more, because the more, like, going back to something we were talking about earlier, the more we can see ourselves, the more we can be it, right? Yeah. Eleanor Roosevelt said this: if you can see it, you can be it. And, I was actually thinking about it this morning as I was in my morning meditation. And I was like, even if it's one person who's impacted by seeing my face on screen or my presence on stage, like, that's one more person in the world that won't feel like they're completely invisible in this medium, which is very much how I grew up feeling. I remember, here's a fun little story that I love to share. There was a show called Romper Room way back in the 80s, if you remember. Every kind of town or county had its own version of it. So in Canada, it was done by TV Ontario. And I remember sitting in front of the TV obsessed with this mirror, and I would sit there waiting. This host would hold up a mirror and it would show children from all over the town or like all over the country. And I would sit there waiting, and I was maybe 3 years old or something, and just waiting for my face or waiting for her to call out my name. That was the biggest part, waiting for my name. And I remember my mom saying to me once, Farah, you may not hear your name. And I was like, but maybe if I just stay here and wait, maybe if I just keep waiting. And I, blessed my mother for probably doing the best that she could at the moment. But I couldn't imagine being her in that position, watching her 3-year-old waiting and waiting and waiting for something she knew was never going to come. And that lasted. Like, every time I would go to a souvenir shop, I would immediately go and look. I would see Sarah, I would see Frank, never see Farah, you know what I mean, on the keychains or whatever they did. So really feel the importance of claiming our names is of value, and seeing ourselves reflected back to us is so important, especially at a young age.
Gosh, so many lessons there. I'm going back to the part, first of all, where you're growing up with your family who's, full of doctors, full of medical practitioners and whatnot. And you knew that you were different and that you wanted a different life for yourself. And so you were kind of following that calling instinctively early on of what you wanted to do. And then going into acting, where you get to play a bunch of different kinds of identities, but recognizing how important it is to kind of bring your heritage with you, then, you're coming back and embracing that part of your identity, whilst also being able to kind of play on other types of roles and things like that, and taking on the diversity of the world that you've grown up in. I think that's very exciting.
Thank
That's
you.
very interesting. Yeah, because I think that a lot of people, even at that very outset, they're intimidated. They feel like, oh, my parents want me to do this. I'm going to be letting them down if I don't follow in their footsteps, if I don't do what they're told. They're controlling the purse strings. And it's quite brave at a young age to be able to break out and do those things on your own. And so, and having that okay from the parents and that validation that, we support you is everything,
Oh, that's
it's like
it.
it's so liberating and a load off. And then, yeah, you're free to
Yeah.
fly, you're free to go to England, and you're free to live out your dreams and explore. And how wonderful that while you were there, you were like, all right, and now I really found my calling. Now I'm
Yeah.
here. You bring a legion with me.
That's so true. Oh, that's so nice. What a lovely way of putting it. I mean, to your point, I think there's also something very real about like the immigrant parent experience. Like, truly, my mother came to Canada as a refugee. So, like, came with her education and her family. That was it as a teenager. My dad, he's the eldest of his family and like literally brought his entire family to Canada. So, like, there's a lot of responsibility. I can imagine the burden that they bore creating a life and like in a small town in the middle of nowhere in northern Ontario where they were the only people of color. Like, my mother has shared with me some of the horrific stories that she experienced from the other dance moms that she protected me from. I was completely oblivious to.
Wow.
She, like a barracuda, protected me vehemently so that I wouldn't feel the racism, the prejudice, and some of the vitriol that was being spewed
So
around.
you really feel that there was any of that present because your mom pretty much put a
Yeah.
bit for you.
I mean, I
Wow.
think I had there was like this one group of girls that were all blonde and they always had trios together and they always did duets together. And I was always like, how come I don't get paired with them? Like, I remember having those sentiments, but I genuinely don't remember ever feeling like because I'm a different skin color or a different ethnicity that I am lesser than. Like, I was a really, really good ballet dancer. And my ballet teacher, again, kudos to her, Mrs. Trelevin, rest in peace. She single-handedly nurtured my skill because she saw that I was really good at what I was trying to do. So she gave me opportunities, and that was part of some of the conflict that I later learned was percolating in the background. But yeah, my mom, she, like a warrior, protected me from so much. I mean, there's a story that breaks my heart when I think about it. We used to go for competitions in these big, coach buses, and we would travel. And so we left North Bay and we were traveling to states, probably like Buffalo, Rochester or something. We had to cross the border. And as we crossed the border security guard guy gets up on the bus and he's like, is everybody here a Canadian citizen? Everybody here was born in Canada. Everybody says yes. And then one of the moms pipes up and she goes, well, Mina, you weren't born in Canada, were you? And so the border guard goes, oh, come with me, and takes my mom off the bus. Like, it was like watching her walk a gangplank, walking off the bus, going off, having the border guard check her passport. Yes, she's a Canadian citizen, gets back up on the bus and she sits down. And I mean, she tells me this, but she sat there and she cried because she was so humiliated. And meanwhile, my dancer friends were like, wait, your mom wasn't born in Canada? Where was she born? And I was like, well, she was born in Uganda. Like, that's no big deal. She's a Canadian citizen. She has a Canadian passport, right? So I didn't click. It never clicked for me that what she was experiencing was the weight of protecting me from carrying any of that until I got much older, that I started realizing. And this is why, just bringing it back to my career, I had this reckoning a little while ago that so much of why I do what I do is to carry forward the stories of my family and my ancestors. Because if I don't do it, what happens to them? If I don't share those stories, they're gone.
I would love to know what your impressions growing up were of your own beauty. Like, did you ever feel beautiful? Did you ever compare yourself? How did you evolve into your own kind of beauty?
Oh, wow, Jennifer, you are getting real deep. This is actually something that I wrestled with for a very long time.
Oh, really?
I never grew up the pretty girl or the cute one. I had beautiful hair. I still have lovely hair, and I appreciate that. I'm so grateful for that. So people were always like wanting to play with my hair and stuff. But I was the athletic girl. I was the smart girl. I was never the pretty cute one. Even looking at my baby pictures, I would joke that I was not cutest of babies. Like, my brother was a Gerber baby and I was the firstborn. So by default, I was beautiful in my parents' eyes. But truly, for the longest time, I was told I looked like my dad. And I internalized that I looked like a boy. So for so much of my youth, up until about 17, I had a shift at 17. But those, first years of my life, I genuinely thought thought I was not pretty because I looked like a boy. I looked like my dad. And now I know that's not what that meant, but at the time I couldn't parse out the intention. And then like I said, a shift happened at 17 where I permed my hair because I wanted curly hair. Little did I know that my hair is actually naturally wavy. Anyway, I permed my hair. And in that summer, I started getting attention from boys in a way I had never in my life. Like I also developed early. So like my body looked like a woman, but I didn't feel like a woman. I didn't feel girly at all, feminine in any capacity, no matter what I tried to do, because I didn't feel it on the inside. And then it was like curling my hair unleashed this connection to my femininity in a way that I'd never experienced. And I started drawing that attention, and it was really disconcerting. I had no idea what to do with that attention, and it made me really uncomfortable. And then by the time I went away for university, I chopped my hair off because I was like, this attention, I don't like this attention. But then I started getting a different kind of attention. I've got striking features, like I have big eyes and I have high cheekbones, and I recognize that about myself. So my hair short, it was like suddenly my face became center, you know what I mean? And people started looking at my face in a different way and less my body. So it was this very interesting journey of completely disconnecting from my appearance, not believing that my appearance had anything to do with who I was, because I was the smart girl and I was the athletic girl. And then starting to realize that my appearance attracts certain kinds of people, negotiating with those new feelings, doing a 180, just almost like an experiment to see. I remember even asking a male friend of mine, because I had chopped my hair off and it was super short. Like it was the days of Halle Berry's short hair. So I like cut it like that. And I was like paranoid. I was like, did I make a mistake? Are people going to think I look manly now? And he laughed in my face and he was like, Farah, the way you look, nobody will ever confuse you for a guy. I was like, oh, okay. And then going to England, it was like this whole identity dovetailing of like my ethnic identity, my gender identity kind of converging. And it was really, again, in England that I started coming into my femininity in a new way, my cultural identity in a new way, and embracing all of them in the ways that actually made me feel more authentically me. And then a friend of mine made this very insightful comment. And she said to me, because, you know, insecurities pop up all the time. And she said, Farah, you would not be in this business as well received as you are if you were not attractive. So if you ever feel like you're not beautiful enough or you're not pretty enough or any of those things, just know that you're still in this business, which means that at least somebody somewhere finds you attractive on camera. And I was like, oh, that's an interesting way of putting it. Not that I put all my value on that, but objectively speaking, I can appreciate that.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
For sure, for sure. I'd love to hear what you think about the way that South Asians or perhaps Muslims are portrayed in the media, because I think that you provide almost a modern take to me. Like if I were to look at you and just in speaking without you being in character, you being Farah, I mean, you're very much like, you know, this is what the new generation of South Asian, individuals and Muslims are like. You know, we are all just, you know, ourselves. We are unto ourselves and we have our own personalities and we're beautiful. But what do you think that the current situation is in terms of representation?
It's so much broader than what it was even 5 years ago. There are a few shows that I look to as kind of guideposts of what I'm excited by in the world. Like there's a show called Lady Parts that came out of the UK, and it's about a girl band, and it shows Muslim women from across the diaspora. Because that's the thing, a lot of people forget that the identity of a Muslim is as broad as the identity of a human is. There are Muslims living in every corner of the world. There are different ways of practicing our faith depending on where people are from, and culture and religion converge in different ways. So like the way that I practice my faith is going to be very different than somebody from Saudi Arabia, very different from somebody from North Africa or from North America, for that matter. Like it's diverse. And I think it's very exciting to see stories on TV now showing different perspectives and different experiences of what it's like to be Muslim. Like there's Rami and Mo. Again, those are male driven. So like that's another part of it. It's a male driven story. There are so many more people making content now, which is really exciting. And so this is again where there's double-sided coin here. So the Muslim identity is one, and then the South Asian identity is another. And there are points where they converge. So Miss Marvel, for example, is a perfect example of South Asian and Muslim converging in a story that is very personal to me. Like the story of partition deeply impacted the migration patterns of my ancestors. And it's part of my inherited, I mean, trauma is one way of putting it, but my inherited legacy comes out of that experience. But I'm not Pakistani. I've never identified as Pakistani. Actually, fun little story too. I've been to Pakistan and I've been to India. I went to Pakistan first and I had this impression, and I would go there and I would feel a kind of homecoming. These are essentially my people. If my family hadn't left, my ancestors hadn't left India to go to East Africa, they would have ended up in Pakistan. So basically, these are my people. Well, I landed in Karachi. I was there for 6 weeks. And I have never felt so alien amongst people who looked like me. It was the strangest disconnect that I was not anticipating. I don't speak Urdu. That's not my mother tongue. I'm not Sunni, which is one sect of Islam, and Pakistan is largely Sunni. So there's a more traditional expression of the faith. The cultural references were not what I grew up with. And so that even though I looked somewhat similar to so many people around me, I felt so alien. It was the strangest experience. And then I went to India years later. And again, I was in India for months. I remember landing there and something in me just felt like home. I'm not Hindu. I don't speak Hindi. I speak Gujarati, which is a dialect. But there was this like invisible knowing that I just got struck by, because culturally speaking, the way that I grew up, our practices are way more in line or similar to those Hindu practices than they were with some of the Pakistani practices. And it was this like head twist shake of reckoning where I was like, my ancestors are from this place, not that place. You know, when we talk about where do we belong in the world, having had that experience, I so deeply believe that we have a connection to land in a way that goes beyond logic. And I think that's why like Indigenous peoples are so protective and so deeply connected to the land that they have lived on for millennia. And those of us who are immigrants on that land, on this land, we don't have the same relationship. But it took me going to a place where I have ancestral roots for me to go, oh, I'm feeling something here by virtue of being on this land that I had never experienced elsewhere. That was really interesting to me. In terms of storytelling, those are the kind of stories that I am interested in, as well at like looking back at where we come from and how we came to be where we are, as well as the other side of the spectrum, which is telling stories as we are. Like my girlfriend and I are writing a film about 3 South Asian women who are of 3 different faiths, 3 different kinds of South Asians who are not related, because the only way, this is the running joke, the only way we're on screen together is if we're all in a family, if we're related to each other, right? Like we can't just be friends on screen together because it's too confusing. I don't know. That to me is way more exciting than like the kind of tokenist perspective of casting, where it's like, oh, you've got just one person who looks like this and one person who looks like this and one person who looks like this. Great, you've got a rainbow, but then what?
Yeah,
Then what are you saying about that?
Facets rather than monolithic nature of what a lot of people seem to do with stereotyping.
Exactly. Bingo.
Yeah. It's fascinating when you're talking about having a connection to the land. And I often wonder about, we're having a pandemic of not only health, but of loneliness. Like a lot of people are just feeling isolated unto themselves and depressed and alone. And I'm like, well, what is it that's causing people in a city to feel like they're alone? What is it that causes them to not feel that they're belonging? Is it that environment? Is it the energy of the people? Is it the energy of the land, of the buildings, of the culture? And then you go to other places and you're like, I belong here. I just feel like this is my home. It is a fascinating phenomenon.
Yeah, it really is. I wonder if a part of it is connected to this idea that we live in isolation of each other. Like we live independently of each other. I was talking to my girlfriend the other day, and she was telling me about her early days of postpartum and how isolating that felt because she had no family around her. And she was like, it made me realize why we live, historically speaking, in multi-generational homes. When an event happens, birth, death, marriage, it's people around you. Exactly, right? It's like literally we live in boxes separated from each other. The intergenerational element is long gone, right? We've, in this society, sequestered the elderly into another realm and, out of sight, out of mind. And then we're left with what? We're just ourselves. I genuinely think that kind of collective individualization of existence is in large part why we feel so much more loneliness, because we don't have regular connection to our people, like our family, literally our people in close proximity. I mean, I'm guilty of this too. My family lives 4,000 miles away, and it weighs on me all the time. My husband and I talk about this, like, how long do we stay here for before we go back to Canada? Or do we go back to Canada? Do we bring my family here, which is what I would love. I come to California because the weather's better. But truly, like, the idea of having a family and not having my parents nearby is really not something that I would want to bring a child into. Like, it's really important to me that my family is nearby, not just emotionally, but physically. Like, it makes a huge difference. Huge difference.
So as an actor, as a storyteller, what would you want your legacy to be?
That's a loaded question because I immediately have like multiple versions of an answer. Maybe I'll try and touch on each of them. In terms of one part of that legacy, a really, really important part is the continuation, the carrying forward of my ancestors' stories. Like I said, I had a reckoning about a year ago as to why that was so important. I am the carrier of those stories. And if I don't tell them, even if like my children or my family members, like it's really important that carries forward. And then more personally, I feel very strongly that we're all meant to do something on this planet. I really believe that there's a purpose for everyone, and anything goes in that. It could be the purpose to be a healer. It could be the purpose to be an educator. It could be anything. And I really believe that part of my purpose in life is bringing people together. I'm a connector extraordinaire. And if I can do that through my artistry, why being in the live theater is so exciting, because you're literally bringing people together, sharing in an experience. That is, I feel strongly that part of my legacy be that, bringing people together and sharing in an event, in something, in a learning, in an experience, and being affected by whatever in a positive way, hopefully.
Great. Well, Farah Merani, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. This was such a delight. It was so great to meet you and have a really thoughtful chat. I appreciate it.
Likewise. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Human Beauty Movement podcast. Be sure to follow, rate, and review us wherever you stream podcasts. The Human Beauty Movement is a community-based platform that cultivates the beauty of humankind. Check out our workshops, find us on social media, and share our inspiration with all the beautiful humans in your life. Learn more at thehumanbeautymovement.com. Thank you so much for being a beautiful human.